All right. How's everybody doing? So it is early. Well, it's 8 o'clock early on the West Coast. It's only 11 o'clock here, so we're halfway through the day here on the East Coast. So how you guys doing? So we got a few people here tuned in, so let me know if you guys can hear me and see me in the little bubble here with my winter beard, my winter fiber mesh beard. And then also you should be able to see the ZBrush 2020 page here, which is at pixelogic.com. So let me know if you guys can see and hear me. Just hit the chat up. There we go. There we go. Good morning, you all. All right. So first I want to see, how many of you guys have upgraded to 2020? I better see a show of like everybody. If someone's still running 4R7, I'm not going to be happy. Just going to let you guys know. So today I'm going to go through some of the stuff, and then in 2020 I'm also just going to hit on some of the items that we've got coming through our social medias and support to kind of give you guys some clarification on those features and tools. And then if you guys have any questions, definitely just put them in chat and we'll go on a lot of tangents today. So nothing really too streamlined or planned for this stream here, so I'm just going to show a bunch of stuff, show some of the basic stuff because I've had some questions recently for new users that picked up, say, ZBrush 2020, wanting to get into the software and how to do certain things. So I'm going to go through and hit those as well. So first, 2020 has been released, so it's been out for a little while now. So if you guys have not been upgraded yet, it is a free upgrade. So if you guys own a license of ZBrush, it is a free upgrade. There's no charge for that. You just go to the My Licenses page and you can just download the update there. Just install it. If you already have a license of 2018, it's just going to automatically connect and work. So definitely, if you haven't done it yet, pick it up. So we got some new things in here. We've got some Extractor brush stuff here. We've got Sculpt and Paint on Morph UVs. We've got some history recall stuff, which is what I showed off the other day. Got the new Move Infinite Depth brush, which I've been using a ton. I've got a lot of feedback from various users. A lot of CNC users have been sending messages just being like, hey, thank you for the Move Infinite Depth. And this has been a huge time saver for me. Also the mask and just color for the Polypaint information stuff, which has been nice. The wall thicknesses, and then we also have the draft analysis and the cam view and silhouette mode as well. And then finally the ZZoo. So a whole bunch of stuff has been added in 2020. You can see all the features that were added here on the pixelogic.com/features page. So just a little information on that. So I'm going to hop over to ZBrush here. And first I'm going to just go over some Extractor brush stuff for you guys. So the Extractor brush is new for 2020, and this allows you to capture sculptural details from your model. And this works in 3 ways. So it really works in 2 ways, but there is kind of like a third variable in there. So I'm just going to go today, we're just going to say 3 ways. So let's say with this object here, I want to create a shape. So just start with my star here. So I'm going to come down here to the initialize menu. I'm going to change this to a sphere. And we'll do it, say, 6 by 6 by 6. And give me a little sphere here. And then we're going to divide this up. And I'm going to come through with, say, the clay buildup brush. Actually, let's just unify this quick too. Let's make it a little bigger. And I'm just going to sculpt the detail. So I'm going to come in and sculpt maybe little bumps here on the surface of the mesh. So there we go. And now let's say I want to extract these, right? So I've got this detail on my model and I want to pick it up and use it elsewhere. So with this, we can use the new Extractor brush. So go to the brush palette over here, and here we have the Extractor brush. This is hotkeyed. If you guys are unaware, inside of ZBrush, you can get to the brush menu by pressing B, and then you'll see there's all these little letters at the top of the brush palette here. So this will perform another sort functionality. So if I'm with the Extractor brush, I can hit B on my keyboard, then hit X, and it's going to isolate by the letter X. And then down here at the bottom, which you guys can't see right now, let's see if I can get it. Okay, there we go. is if I hit X, it's going to isolate now further, and then you can see there's little letters next to each of the brushes. So T is the hotkey for the extractor brush. So if I want to get to this brush quick, if I'm in the clay buildup brush, I can hit B, X, T on my keyboard, and now it's selected. So all the brushes inside of ZBrush have that kind of 3-letter hotkeys. Some of them have 2s, but a lot of them work with 3. So standard brush would be B, S, T, clay buildup, B, C, B. And so you can use that to kind of quick select your brushes in there. So I'm going to go back to the extractor. So B, X, T, we're just going to select that. There are a few brushes inside of ZBrush, just some, just a little. And so with this, let's say I want to pick this up. So I'm going to enlarge my draw size here. And then the extractor brush by itself, if you just use this, you're not going to get much out of it, right? So if you just grab the brush and use it, you're not going to see anything. It's just going to sculpt like a normal brush. So what we want to use is that the extractor brush is set up to use a function that now lives in the alpha panel, and this is called from brush. And so when you have an extractor brush selected, you can use this with any brush, this from brush option here, but the extractor brush is just set up so you don't have to enable a bunch of the functionality. You can just get right in and use it. So basically, when you have the extractor brush selected, if you hit G on your keyboard, it's going to activate this from brush mode. And the from brush mode is now going to allow you to pick up those details from your model. So if you hit G or click this button, it's going to enable that. You'll see there's some options over here as well. First one is the alpha width, which will allow you to set the width of the alpha that's going to be generated. The height of the alpha will just be determined by how long you actually drag the brush across your model. And then you have a blur seam option 2, which will look at the middle point and apply a blur to the top and bottoms and try to make you a tileable alpha out of what you picked up. So you can mess with those settings as long as you're in the alpha from brush mode. So with this, if I come across the model here and click G to activate that mode, and now if I come across the surface, let me just get this lined up here and drag, it's going to try to capture that detail. And you'll see when this happened, this is the alpha I got, right? So this is not giving me that extracted detail. So there are 3 things that the extractor brush is looking at. The first one is it's going to use your undo history, okay? So this model right now is going to take the current undo I'm on, and it's going to use that as one of the points of reference. So that's what I want to capture, is this point. And then it's going to compare it to another undo. And the undo it's going to compare to on this mesh here is the very first one all the way down here. And if I click this, you can see what it is. You'll see that it's comparing it to this Polymesh 3D star. So ZBrush is taking this as the first point of reference, and it's comparing it to the version of my mesh right here. So it's trying to calculate the extraction of this data through projection from this undo to this undo. And the result it's getting is correct, but it's not what you want. So the undo is what the extractor brush is going to look at. So just remember that when using the brush. If you start getting weirdness like this, if you have an undo and it's something totally different or off in space, when you try to use the extractor, it's going to try to project from that first undo to the one you have selected, and you may get something crazy, which is what is happening here. So in order to pick up these details, what I want to do is I want to set a point in my undo history here that makes sense, right? So I want to go back to the point on my sphere here where I didn't have any of that sculptural detail. And I want to tell ZBrush, this is the point I want to reference. The first point of reference is, this is the one, and then I want to reference that second one. So I want to extract from this projection to the other projection. So to tell ZBrush this, I just need to come to the undo history here, hold Control and click. And you see it's going to apply this little bar here, right? So now if I go back up, you can see that this undo is now tagged inside of ZBrush. So now if I come to this, and now I hit G again with my extractor brush and drag across the surface here, it's now going to pick up correctly. So remember, when you're using the extractor brush, it's looking at the undos, okay? So option 1, let's reset this. And I mentioned there's 3 here. So option 1 is it's going to, if you have sculptural details, let's get out of here. It's going to, option 1, look at the first undo on that subtool to the current undo you're on. So this one, if I extract it, it's going to use the first undo, which is this, and it's going to compare it to this, and then give me the difference through projection of those two objects. Option 2, if you have no undos, so this object here, this is going to be basically doing the same thing as number 1, but it just doesn't have multiple undos. It's going to take the first undo, which happens to be the undo that has the sculptural details. And if this happens, ZBrush is now going to attempt to apply an algorithm and try to determine what's sculptural and what's not. And then it's going to pick up the difference between those. So that is option 2. And then option 3 is if I sculpt my details here, you can come up to the undo history bar, go to where you want to pick up from, hold Control and click, and now ZBrush is going to use that as the point of reference to your undo. So those are the 3 different options there for the extractor brush. So first undo, if the first undo is the undo you're currently on, it's going to use an algorithm and try to calculate the sculptural details. And then if you have a control clicked point, it's going to use that to compare to the other undo. So those are the 3 options there. So I'm going to try to follow the questions today too, so I'm going to hit up these. And let's see what this is here. Thank you, it's my fiber mesh beard. It's about ready to get to go though. We'll probably hold it on to Christmas, and then after Christmas it's going to be gone. Texture apart from the surface noise button. I'm just reading some questions here. So for Lucky, are you asking, is there a way to separate the depth from a texture? Is that what you're looking for? You want to have a texture that's different from the depth information? Hit me up on that and we can cover that. Yeah, so here, okay, so in 2020, so this one's for Lucky here, who's on Twitch right now, and this may totally not be what you're looking for, but I'm going to show it anyway. So the question, he has, say, an alpha that he wants to apply, and this could be your depth, and then he has a texture, right? So before, in previous versions of ZBrush, let's get this one here, and let's fill this with color. Take this off, fill it with white. So I have a sphere, I've gone through and I've filled it with white material. There you go. And I'm now going to select, say, the standard brush, change my stroke to drag rect, take this alpha, and if I have this alpha and I come across a model and drag, so my intensity here, you see I'm going to start getting this sculptural mark. Just divide this sphere up some here. So I'm getting this. Okay. Now let's say I want to have this and then I want to apply a texture to that area. So come over here and grab, say, the jelly bean texture. Now, if you do this normally with a version of ZBrush, say 2019, this is the result you're going to get. So it's going to take the texture and it's going to apply it to your model. However, it's going to clip it by the alpha. So if I have no alpha on this brush and I apply this with RGB turned on, you see I'm going to get this. So I'm getting the texture. The fall off here is based on that focal shift, and then the intensity, if I turn Z add off here. So there's just pure texture. And then if I go back to the alpha and turn my texture off, there's just pure alpha. So if you have the texture on, by default, ZBrush is going to look at this texture and it's going to clip it out by the alpha. So if I drag this out with this alpha, you see it's going to come out like this. So I'm not getting the full texture. You can see it's kind of fading off where that alpha is blurring out on the edge. So if I take something really small or really gray, say like, let me try this one, alpha 39, it's going to cull out the texture a lot more. So as I drag this out, you can see I'm getting a lot of faded texture on this alpha. And so if you want to bring something in that's, you know, a total different kind of pattern, you're going to have to make sure that your alpha is like pretty much 100%. If you have any fall off in this mode, you're going to get this very soft texture. So what we've added in 2020 is up here there's this A button, which is called Paint with Alpha. And if you toggle this off, ZBrush is now going to keep the texture 100% and then keep the alpha separate. So this way you can apply an alpha and a texture separately. So if you have an alpha and you want this texture to go 100% on the alpha and you only want the alpha to grab the sculptural details, if you have this A button off, when you now apply this, you see you're going to get full texture and then also the sculptural details. So the alpha with this A button off before would give you this clipped result, and now if you have it off, you're now going to get pure texture and then your sculptural details. Now you can control the pure texture by this focal strength up here, and this will actually allow you to get a kind of a radial fade, so you're still getting that pure texture, and now you can come in and add a little more radial to it. So this will allow you to apply that detail along with that texture at the same time. So one little thing there with A. Let's see here. Yes, so we'll go through the ZZoo. I'll show you guys that. VDM brush in stroke mode. Reading some questions here. So Lucky, you can also say use the wool texture in Spotlight too. You can pull it into Spotlight and then apply it that way as well. You'll do it on a planar projection type format, but you could then paint where you want the wool texture through Spotlight. That's another way. For the Polypaint information, if you're using, what format are you exporting out, Prasad? If you're exporting out as an OBJ and if you're bringing it into an application that supports polypainting, you can definitely, it should retain that coming back in. If that application does not support polypainting, you will lose the polypaint on the back import. However, you can do a projection inside of ZBrush and just store a morph target on the model, and then you should be able to project that polypaint back on after it has UVs. So if you want to control the Z depth. Reading Lucky's questions again. So there is some, there are some different things you can apply to your texture. So if you spray a texture, you can get variation on that. So you can have the ability to spray different color patterns, and then depending on what settings you have here, you can spray out your colors. So if you want some crazy jelly beans, you can definitely do that. There's a question on that. So Lucky, I'm not sure 100% kind of what you're looking to do. I may have you send me a support ticket, and then I can go from there. I'm pretty sure there's probably a way to do it. Also, if you guys, in 2022, there's now a help menu here. So if you guys want to submit anything to say support, you can just click this. It'll take you right to the site. Also has helpful links to ZBrush Central, ZBrush Live. You can search the online docs through here. So we've added this as well, so you guys can reference this stuff quick instead of having to open up a browser and try to remember the URLs. It's all right here now in this handy little help menu that now lives inside of 2020. Yeah, Lucky, if you don't mind, just submit a support ticket, support.pixologic.com. You can use the help menu here and just tag my name in it, and they'll send it to me. And then we'll check it out, see if we can get what you're looking for there. Yeah, for the projects, let me see if I have a example model here. I can show the project stuff for you. Because basically the project will work similar to, say, if you have a model and it was ZRemeshed, okay? So let's say with this guy here, we'll go ahead and let's just apply some jelly beans to him quick. I don't want the spray though. So it's gonna be, he's beautiful, he's beautiful. All right, so Prasad, so it asks, you know, kind of hit on this. So let's say you have your model, he has Polypaint. And as an example, I have a ZRemeshed version of this guy right here, right? So if you're sending it out, it's probably gonna be low res already. So just one thing on that, just here. But let's say I sent this out, unwrapped him, brought him back in. He's got no Polypaint, okay? So with this, I wanna get back this Polypaint I had on the model that I have here. So this is the one that has the Polypaint, this one has UVs. So what we can do now is we just want to take our one that we brought in. If it has UVs, probably has subdivisions, right? So we're going to divide it up a little here. And then now what I want to do is I want to come down to the morph target area. And I want to store a morph target right here. And then now make sure I have my dyno visible, and then we go to project. Now there's another option here that's been added, but we're just going to show you the 2019 version first, and then we'll show the 2020. In here I just make sure I have my colorized version of my dyno selected, and then I have my ZRemeshed one that has the UVs. So now I want to get that color back on it. So I usually come down here to the projection setting, and this is in Tool, Subtool, Project, and I usually set this distance to say 0.1. And this is just usually all the settings I've gone through and tried. 0.1 is usually the one that always works, so I usually just set that. So I stored a morph target. I've now changed my projection setting to 0.1, and now I'm going to click Project All, and it's going to ask me if I want the poly painting. So yes, I definitely do. This is going to project. Just going to give it a second here, and you'll see as the projection came back, I now have this, right? So I got the color on my model. Now sometimes if you're doing projection on different surfaces, this guy's probably going to be okay. But there may be times where, since it is doing a projection from one mesh to the other, you may get some ray casts that are going to miss because you're definitely projecting from a different mesh. And if it goes through the model, you may have a spike. So we stored the morph target at this stage, so I can go back down here and I can now apply this morph target back, and this is going to give me back my mesh. So the original mesh I had before I did the projection, in case any of that projection stuff happens. So projection, if anything happens, I can bring the morph back, and now I have my color on that model that has those subdivisions and those UVs. So the projection is probably going to be the best way to go. Now the other option that was added in 2019 is, so instead of doing this morph option now, in the project menu there is an ability here, there's two of these options here, and you can actually tell it if you want it to project geometry or color or one or the other. So if I only want the color in 2020 now, I don't have to store that morph target anymore. I can just come over here and set color on, and now it'll project just the color from that object there. So if I do the same process, project all, hit yes to the Polypaint here, this is now going to just project the color. And so now I didn't need to do that morph target step. So if you're in 2019, you're going to have to do that morph target step. But if you're not in 2019, you're in 2020, you can just come to project, make sure you just leave color on, do your project. I recommend setting the distance to 0.1, and then it's going to project your Polypaint back onto your mesh. So let me know if that helps at all. Checking these questions quick. Yeah, so some of the file formats may not fully allow the Polypaint transfer, so definitely GoZ is one that should. So if you're using GoZ to take it into Maya, it should retain that. That's one of the things that GoZ tries to do there. But oftentimes, it depends on either side. If the OBJ, ZBrush's OBJs now will support color information, so they do retain that color. But if you import it into Maya, there may be a setting that strips it off. And then if you export out of Maya, there may be a setting that strips it off. So just one thing through there. But the GoZ is pure GoZ, so it's going to be the same settings in and out, so that would retain the color going one way and then retain it back. So for the Lucky's asking, will it subdivide by itself? So Prasad, what it sounds like he's doing, it sounds like he has a model. It's got the Polypaint information on it, right? So it's basically this. He's got subdivisions, and he just sends it out. It sends it out as ZBrush like this to unwrap and then bring it back in, and then he's losing his Polypaint information. So at his stage, he probably has a mesh with subdivisions on it. It will not apply the subdivisions automatically, so if you need to do this process manually, you would need to divide up. So this model here, as an example, was just ZRemeshed. So I took my Dynamesh version, I applied ZRemesher to it, which gave me this version of it. And then in order to project those color details back, if I just do it at the version that ZRemesh gave me, this is what I would get. So that you can see the colors are not going to be as crisp as the ones on the 1.2 million polygon version. So at this stage, I would need to manually divide up. Now, you probably wouldn't want to use dynamic subdivisions, because dynamic subdivisions is just going to give you a preview of what the subdivisions look like. So it's just dynamically doing it. So even if I turn dynamic subdivisions on, so I go down here, let's just delete this is still what I'm going to get. So the mesh is going to look smooth, but it's not going to give you a texture smooth version, because it's just taking that low poly version of the model and giving you a preview of what it looks like with subdivisions. So if you were going to project the Polypaint back onto that mesh, what you'd have to do is use traditional subdivisions, divide it up, and then do your project, which would then have enough points on your model to capture that vertex color. So the VDM brush will work with what kind of stroke. So this is for blind fox here. What kind of stroke are you looking for? So the VDM will work with most of them. So if you take like the chisel brush here, we'll go back to a handy sphere here. We'll grab the trusty here. So that's a drag rectangle stroke. Drag dot will work. Freehand's going to work. Dots. So it should work with most strokes. Is there any particular stroke you're looking for? Because this is all VDM brush, and I'm just changing the stroke palette over here. So it should go through these. Now if you have like a curve, you're going to have to drag it to get that to update. But it should work for the majority of the strokes. Is that what you're asking about, Fox? Noah, what's the for the percentage of the? So the dynamic mode might be Sculptris Pro. So that, however, will not work with the. Let's get out of here. The chisels. If you have any of the other kind of brushes loaded in, you'll be able to use that. Oh, hold on. Let me reset my brushes here. Wait for it. So if you ever have any brushes go crazy, let me see if I can move my head here. If you go to the brush palette, in the brush palette there is a reset all brushes option down here at the bottom. And so if you ever have brushes and you've changed a bunch of settings, then you want them all back, you can come down here and you can either use reset current brush, which is going to reset just the current brush you have, or you can use reset all brushes, and that's going to reset everything. So oftentimes if you come through and start making stuff, it's going to be all crazy, and then you may end up changing settings. You can come in and just quickly reset them, and then you're going to get them back to where they are. And then so with this one here, let's go to the standard brush here, click build up, make sure no subdivisions. Yeah, so the VDMs will not work with Sculptris Pro, so it will disable that. So that's going to be, that may be what you've seen in the video with that. Now you can use, say a different brush, like say a snake hook brush. Where you at, snake hook? And you can't apply alphas to that. So you can kind of get a similar effect if you have Sculptris enabled. I changed some of my settings here. And start pulling these out. You can kind of get some of that where Sculptris is kicking in along with that alpha, but it won't work with the VDM brushes. But the VDM brushes will work with any of those strokes up there. For the curve, if you have a curve brush, so to use any of the curve brushes, you need to make sure your model has no subdivisions on it. So this one here doesn't. And if you draw a curve out, You see it has a line through here. So if you want to get rid of that line, you come to the stroke curve area and then go to curve functions, and there's a delete option right here, and now delete the curve, so you can see it's gone. You can also click on the mesh, so you can see here I have that active curve, and if I click, it's not going to go away as well. Sometimes when you're doing a lot of curves, you might not have room to click on the model to clear it. So if you come up to the stroke palette, you can just use the delete option too. But if you just click, it'll apply it as well. So you can click it and it will not remove it. So that's the other way you can remove the stuff. So the ZBrush process is the same as it was in 2019 to create those, and then you can build, pretty much anything. Basically, you need to start from one of the projects. There's a miscellaneous folder here, and you have these brush templates right here. So basically, you sculpt your detail on a plane and then convert that to VDM. An example of some of these brushes here. So let's say I take this one here. So this is a VDM brush, and if I just come over, one thing, if you ever guys want to see how a brush was made, you can take any IMM brush, you can take any VDM brush, you can take anything that has a 3D element that corresponds with it, and if you just select a mesh, make sure you have a part selected here, and if you go to geometry and then go to modify topology, there's a mesh from brush option here, and this will take that part, and if you click this, it's going to show you what it looks like. So you can go and take them and then look at them and see what it is. So this is one for fur here, VDM for fur. So this was all sculpted off of that plane grid. So you can go to the project folder, go to miscellaneous, load any of these planes, then sculpt your detail on this, and then VDM gets created based on looking at the grid and then the offset of those polygons on that grid, and that's how it's generating the VDM, because it needs a reference point of where to push and pull the geometry as you use it. So with this brush here, you just can sculpt stuff. You can do undercuts, things like that on it, and then after you create the brush, you can now say take a mesh, divide it up, and now when you use this on your mesh, it's going to draw it out. So you'll get that nice fur shape there. And the one thing nice about VDMs is the undercut ability, because you can see now I can get overhangs and different things happen along the surface. So for production pipeline wise, it is going to modify your geometry. So if you have to keep a vertex order on things, it is going to modify the topology, but it's going to keep it. So this is one reason why it's not going to work with Sculptris Pro, because it needs that constant between A and between B points of reference. So as you're using this, depending on your surface, if you have surface topology, like this area here, which has this nice this nice point right here, this is usually like one of the worst, kind of geometry things if you're dealing with any stuff. And if I take the VDM and draw it out on here, you see I'm going to start getting some weirdness through here. And this is because the VDM is looking at the surface you have and it's distorting that surface. So it's going to retain whatever surface it has. So as this one had here, it's going to be a little rough. But if I do it on the side over here, I'm going to get a cleaner result because of the underlying topology on the model. So the VDM won't change that as you use it. Now, pretty much everything is going to be, relative inside of ZBrush, unless you're using basically Sculptris Pro, should keep the same mesh surfaces. Sculptris Pro is just going to ignore it all. So if you need to keep a vertex count for character morphing, facial morphing, stuff like that, you touch Sculptris Pro, it's just going to tear it up. So one thing there. For the night shadow, so you have a question about the mirror and weld, so you have to press 2 buttons. There is a smart mirror now that's inside of ZBrush. So I had a macro a long time ago for this, and then it's actually been added in now. So basically, if you have the dog here, and by default, what ZBrush would do is it would capture this part of the dog and always mirror this to here. And in previous versions, say I think it was 2018, if you had the dog over here on this side and you tried to perform a mirror and weld, so that's in the tool, geometry, mirror and weld, since there was nothing on this side of the screen, or the opposite side of the world with the dog, when you press this, it would go wah, wah, wah. You're not getting anything mirrored. Now ZBrush, the mirror and weld, is going to check and see as you're working on a mesh which side has geometry on it. If the geometry is on this side and you click mirror and weld, it's going to take this and flip it over there. So if I do that, I'm going to get the dog there. And then also it's now going to do the other side. So if I have the dog over here and I click mirror and weld, it's going to put him over there. So it's been upgraded to be smart in that sense, where if you have part of a model that is on the opposite side of your symmetrical line, it's going to check and see if that actually has something over there, and then it's going to take that one side and flip it over. Now the one thing it won't do, or one thing that's always going to default to, is that if you have something like this where you have two dogs, and let's say I'm sculpting on this side, right? And now if I do mirror and weld, you see it's gonna not take the side I sculpted on and flip it over. So ZBrush will still, it's gonna check to see if there's geometry. If there's geometry on both sides of that center line, ZBrush is always gonna default to taking the right side, so if you look at the little head here, the right side of the world and mirroring it over the other side. So there's no way to really tell, you know, hey, I've been sculpting over here, this is the one I want to mirror over. There's no real automatic process that can be done for that. So you would have to do, if you want this to be on the other side, because this one's going to give you this now, but you want it the opposite way, you would still have to go to the deformation palette, do the mirror first manually, and then go to mirror and weld, and you'd get the update. So it's smart in terms of, we'll look if there's something there, but if there is something there, it's always going to go from the right to the left. So you would have to do two buttons if that is your scenario. For the subdivision stuff, it's going to always divide basically by powers of 4. So you're not going to be able to set if you come up and click subdivide Noah, it's just going to divide the mesh. So if you have a model that has, let's see, let's do this one here. If you divide the mesh, it's always going to look at the points and divide it to a certain amount, because it's just taking all the geometry and applying divisions across everything. Now, Dynamesh, that has the ability where it's going to take your mesh and it's going to flood it with geometry, and so you can kind of get to a relative point with that. One way you can use that's inside of ZBrush to allow you to see kind of a poly count is if you go to the move option and get the Gizmo 3D, there's a gear icon here. And if you click this, there is a remesh by Dynamesh deformer. And if you run this, there is a little white cone down at the bottom. And if you hover over this, you see it's going to say target polygon count. Okay, so this will allow you to kind of determine the polygon count you're going to get when the Dynamesh happens. So if I want, say, around 20,000 and click that, you're going to see it's going to get close to 20,000. It's never going to be exact because ZBrush is flooding the whole, basically your scene with geometry, and then it's filling that void with it. So it's going to give you an approximation. But so there's 20,000. If I want it, say, lower, say 7,000, you see it's going to get pretty close using this. Now, this way is going to give you that functionality in poly count, right? So that's the deformer with the gear icon, clicking this, remesh by Dynamesh. Now, if you're not using the deformer, you'll use just the normal Dynameshes over here. This one's just going to have a resolution slider. So it's not going to give you the ability to calculate this by Dynamesh, by poly count by default. So in here you'd set a resolution, then you'd run Dynamesh, and you're going to get a poly count based on the resolution you have set here. So for the lower ones, I probably have to go lower in my resolution and then Dynamesh and see what it gives me. And then you have to maybe do this a few times until you get to the resolution you're kind of looking for. But if you want a closer, almost exact resolution, just go to the gear icon, remesh by Dynamesh, use this white circle here, set your Dynamesh values, and run that. Now Dynamesh isn't a subdivision, so it's going to flood the model again. So just one thing there. So it's not going to be like dividing your model, it's changing the topology across everything. So for the macro stuff, it's actually, macros are pretty simple. There's a lot of stuff inside of ZBrush that can be automated just by button presses. So if you can do it through a series of button presses, you can generally set up a macro for that. So going back to night shadows option here, so let's go back to my dog. Let's see if we can do this live. We'll see how this goes. All right, so Night Shadow has a dog here, and he has done this, and then he's gone through and sculpted on this, right? So he wants a macro quick where we can take this, and the process that he wants to apply in a macro, so it's turning it into a single button instead of two buttons, is that he wants to apply this mirror option here, and then he wants to apply mirror and weld. So this is a two clicks inside of ZBrush. He wants it condensed to one. So to make a macro, I'm gonna come over here to macro. I'm just gonna type in new macro here. You're gonna get a little dialog. It's gonna say if you want to initialize this. I don't know if you guys won't be able to see this. So I'm gonna hit no to that, because basically we don't want to initialize ZBrush. We want where we're at right now. And now I just want to do the process, right? So I want to come over here, click mirror, then I want to click mirror and weld, and then I'm gonna go to macro and click end macro. Now after this is done, it's gonna ask you to save this, and so you can save this in, let's see if I can get you guys to see this here. Wait for it, there we go. So it's asking you probably a window to save this. So this wants to go into your ZBrush directory, your Z startup macros, and then there's already a miscellaneous folder in here, so I usually just stick stuff in here. And then in here, we can call this Night Shadow. All right, so we'll call this the Night Shadow macro. Then we're gonna click save. Now after this is saved, we can now come up to our macro palette here, click reload macros, and in here, we should have a button called Night Shadow. Now at any time you can open this up and say a text editor and edit this. You can make the button larger, change stuff, do whatever you want. But as for just staying inside of ZBrush and keeping it simple, that's the whole process. So we did new macro, clicked the two buttons we wanted to do, went to macro, and then hit end macro, saved it, reloaded, and then now we have the macro here. So now if I go to my dog, we'll go back to this version right here. Got symmetry turned off, sculpting, 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 sculpting. And now I have it on the other side, right? So now if I did this normally, mirror and weld, this is what's happened, right? But now I can go to my macro, I can click the Night Shadow macro here, and it's going to do it. So it's gone through and it's automated that mirroring first, and then the mirror and weld, and now it's giving me my result. So we've just taken those two buttons, stored them into this macro right here, and now when we click that button, it's going to do that process. Does that make sense, Night Shadow? Looking through the questions here. For the masking, masking being opaque, so we have a question here about masking. Let's look at this guy. So mask pen is just holding out control, and the question is asking about how to keep it opaque so it's 100% and not have it look at your brush printer. We done died. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. Let's try that again. So masking. So if you hold down control, it's going to automatically select the mask pen for you. And if you kind of do this with a pen tablet and light pressure, you can see you can get varying degrees of masking. So the question is asking about how to keep this opaque. So you can definitely change your focal shift here, and this will help a lot with that. So as you draw this out, see it's going to keep it solid around the edges, so you're not going to get fade off here, but it's still going to be looking at that pen pressure. So what you probably want to do if you want to keep it, 100% out of your pen pressure, you can go to the brush palette here and go to tablet pressure. And in here you have an intensity, an RGB intensity. So you can just come through here, reset these, and then max this out. The intensity, max this out. And now it should ignore that brush printer. So now even if I do it really light, it's always going to give me 100% brush printer. So basically, if you want a mask to be 100% opaque and you have a pen tablet, you can change your focal shift, which is going to decrease the blurring around the edges, so it's going to make it solid. And then going to the brush palette, you want to make sure you're holding control when you change this. So you want to make sure you still have that mask brush selected. And then in the brush palette, if you go to the tablet pressure area, you just want to take the RGB intensity and the Z intensity and set these both to 100. So just take them up and drag it all the way to the top. So this is what it normally is. We're going to drag that all the way up and then drag the other one up. And now when you apply it, it should be like that. So the only way to use a mask brush is by pressing Control. So you will have to use that modifier to apply the masking. But that way you'll end up with your mask being opaque. Now you could paint with it too, so if you don't really want to hold control, you can definitely fill your model with, say, white, and then take like a black and use the paintbrush. RGB 100, set your focal shift, you can kill the brush pressure on that as well, and now you're taking your model and you're painting with black. After you have that paint all on your model, you can now go to the masking area over here, and you can do mask by color, mask by intensity. We'll look at that white and black value, and then now this is going to give you a mask. So you could do that too if you want. If you don't want to hold control all the time, just paint white with white and black on your model, and then take that color information, convert it to a mask, and then you won't have to press Control. But by default, pretty much the only way you're going to get a mask is by holding Control. Let's see what else we got here. So Peel UV is still in development, so it is still being worked on there. Another one, we had a question here relating about processor cores, the multi-threading and optimization. So in the preferences, ZBrush by default is going to look at all the cores you have and it's going to use them. You can tailor that down if you want. So when I do streaming, you can see here in my preferences palette, in the performance area, there is a max threads option here. So the machine I have has 8 threads. And so when I'm streaming, I turn this down so I don't give ZBrush as much power. So I usually set this at 6. So this allows my OBS to get some processor, anything else I'm running get processor. So ZBrush isn't grabbing everything. So you can decrease it as needed, but in general, ZBrush is going to go through and set your threads to the maximum amount your machine has. In terms of the multi-threading and stuff like that, pretty much all machines now are multi-threaded, so it's just going to automatically do that. You don't really need to test anything. It's going to be optimized for your system as you install it. So one thing there with that. Auto cucumber. Matchmaker like a smooth brush. Pretty good. All right, so let's see what I got here. Let's see what I got. So I'm go over some different things now. If you guys have questions, just keep showing them out. We'll just keep going on tangents. ZBrush does not use any GPU, so it's all CPU. So there's no GPU usage. It's all running in software off of your CPU. And there's some processes that are set up to use all the cores on your machine. Some other ones will kind of focus on one single core. So definitely more and then higher speed is always going to be better. RAM is also good to have, and also having your memory files or your caching for ZBrush stored on a SSD drive will help too. There's H2 geometries, no changes in 2020, still the same as before, so you still be able to take your model, divide them up with HD and sculpt. So here is a quick example, just kind of demo some of the Extractor stuff. So I've been using Extractor a lot with all sorts of stuff, but scan data has been really nice. Let me just reset all my brushes here. So with this, I have just some scans. So these were just photogrammetry. Went outside, took some pictures. So I've got some walkways, I've got some dirt, some more dirt, some gravel, and some pine needles. And so using the Extractor brush to kind of rip surfaces off has been pretty awesome, because you can just take it, rip the surface off, and go with it. When you're using scan data, there's a few things that we talked about earlier. The Extractor brush is going to look at those three things. So it's going to look at number one, your first undo. Number two, if your first undo is the undo you're on, it's going to try to calculate the difference in sculptural details automatically through an algorithm. And then option three, it's going to look at that point you stored using control and click on your undo to your current undo. So those are the three ways the Extractor brush is going to get picked up. For these objects here, these were scans, and I have multiples of these guys. So let's first, I'm just going to go through the Extractor thing one more time in terms of these. So here I have a version of this. Let's delete this here. So this is one piece of the gravel path here, and this option is the second option. So I have my first undo is the undo I'm on. So if I grab that Extractor brush, let's change my brush size bigger, and now I'm going to do it with drag rect this time. Actually, let's just grab the. So some of these brushes are already set up, like the drag rectangle one here, so you can just grab the Extractor drag rect, and it's already good to go for this process. Once again, you want to make sure you hit G, which is going to activate the from brush mode here. I hit G and then drag this out. This is now going to process, and you can see I'm going to get an alpha and then also a texture with this. So this was the second option, which basically your undo is your first undo. So this is the result I'm getting. If I test this, let's get a Cube 3D here, make this poly mesh, scale this down. Divide that up some. Now if I drag this out, you can see that this, it's very hard to see here, is the result I'm getting from that pickup. And what is happening here is that it's taking the texture, which it grabbed successfully from my scan data. It's generated an alpha, which it's grabbed successfully from the scan data. However, when I apply it, you see I'm getting the sculptural details, but I'm not getting the texture. And this is based on the A option up here that's being called out. So we want to make sure that we have that on, and then we want to ignore that. Well, I guess it would help if I had Polypaint on too. Wait for it. So there you go. So now you're getting the color and the texture. And if I had A on and dragged it, this is what I would get. So that is why the A option was kind of introduced into 2020. Because if you picked up something with color, you want to probably apply it with the color back onto your surface, and you didn't want that alpha to cull it out. So you want the alpha to give you the sculptural details, and you want the texture to go on top of it, and so there you go. And that's the result there for that. Now going back to my stones here, this was the version with the Polypaint information, right? So I have another one here, and this one has an undo. And so just to show you the difference of this was the pickup I got through the algorithm process. So the undo was my current undo, and this is what I got out of that. Now if I wanted this to be a little bit cleaner, what I can do is I can take my scan data and then I reverse engineered it basically. So I had my mesh, and then I wanted to create a mesh for it to kind of get a clean slate to capture 100% of the details. And this was done by going through and maybe I have it here. Where's it at? I lied. I thought this was the file. Hold on, wait for it. Let's reopen this file. One of these in here is set up like this. There we go. All right. So here is the scan data, and let's do the pickup on this. Let's duplicate this. Wait for it. Hang in there. Hang in there. Pick this up. All right, so this is the extract with my undo being my current undo. All right, and if I come to my, make another cube 3D here. We're gonna Dynamesh it this time because we got too crazy last time. We got too crazy. Dynamesh. There we go. And let's fill with white. Now let's apply it. So this is option 1. So we're getting out of that. So it looks pretty good. And then option 2 is I have my mesh, and the first undo is this. So basically what I did here was I had my scan data. This is what it looked like. And then I reversed engineered it to generate a surface to be calculated from that was clear of all data. And that right here is what this is. So this is just a flat plane filled with white. So now what ZBrush is going to do when I use this brush, it's going to look at that first undo, which is this, and it's going to compare it to this, and then give me the details in between. So I've gone back and generated a version of this to calculate from. So instead of running the algorithm, I'm now going through and giving it ZBrush something to look at as a base and something to compare it to. So now if I pick this up, you're now going to notice that I'm going to get a little different alpha over here that's generated. So the texture is basically going to be the same, but my alpha is going to be a little bit different. And this, in some cases, is going to give you a better projection. So it's going to give you a better estimation of the sculptural details on the mesh because you're giving it from a flat surface, a clearly defined projection area. So now if I apply this one here, so I'm going to get a little more depth and detail out of that. And depending on what this is set to, you're going to maybe get a little clarity on that. So that's another difference you can do if you have scan data and it's not, you know, the algorithm process is giving you close to what you want but may not be fully what you want. You can go through and generate a mesh to project from, and then it will use that as the base, calculate the details off of that, and go from there. And you can also use the history brush to generate this stuff too, so you can go back and forth with all this. So just think of all these things. There's a lot here you can do with just projections. So all it is projecting from one surface to another, and that's what the extractor brush is, and that's what the history recall brush is. But this allows you to get really cool stuff. You can come through and grab, you know, a whole bunch of different surfaces and then apply these wherever you need them. And it's pretty quick, especially for texturing. And then with the ability to now use this A option here, which is going to no longer call out your texture based on this alpha, you can now grab the surface, grab the texture data with it, and then apply it elsewhere. So it's pretty fun to process all that. Let's see what we have. Can you demo work for using alpha plus extractor or VDM plus extractor? So so to answer your question here, so the alpha plus extractor is, you know, going to be fairly easy. It's going to work better than the VDM to extractor. So one thing with the VDM option, let me just go and grab. Let's load this other brush here. So there's another question we had asked here. Let's see if I have this brush loaded still. Let's go grab this. All right, so here we have a sphere, and I'm going to divide this up a little bit. I'm just going to go ahead and delete all those subdivisions on there. And I have a VDM brush, which is fur. So I'm going to apply this to my sphere here. So here's what I got. Make sure this is Dynameshed. It is. Okay. And now let's say I want to extract it. Let's make it a little bit smaller. So here's an example of the extractor brushes with VDM. Now, one thing to note with VDM brushes is that they allow you to do overhangs. So you see this part right here, and this is big because it's basically taking the surface and it's distorting it, so it allows you to get over. Now the extractor brushes are using alphas. So when you extract a surface detail, it's going to apply a projection. It's going to look at the difference between your one point and the point you've just sculpted, and it's going to pick up between those two. And this is all done through projection. So as an example of this, if I set this as my point, so I'm going to hold Control and set this as the point to pick up from, and then this is where my sculptural detail is. Now I'm going to grab the extractor brush. Just do this one here. Actually, we'll go back to the drag rectangle. And now I want to pick up this detail. Now since this is a projection, ZBrush is going to look at the before and after between these two, and it's going to pick it up. However, it's using projection, so it's not doing a morph target. It's not looking at everything. It's looking at a projection. So if you grab this, you see I'm going to get a decent result, but if I apply this to my model here, you can see I'm no longer getting that undercut. Because what it is it is now turned it into a 2D alpha. So it's not a 3D alpha. It's not giving you a VDM mesh. It's not giving you a vector displacement mesh. It's giving you a alpha. And the alpha is always going to be looking, basically it's like the same thing like doing a MRGBZ grab, I can never say that word, or coming over here and doing a crate, where's it at? Not here. A transfer, a grab dock, which is going to grab your depth information. That's what it's doing. And so it's looking at basically your projection, right? So it doesn't see that back face behind this thing here. So it's not going to give you a pickup of a VDM brush if that VDM brush has these overhangs to it. So it's going to give you, it's going to pick up all the details through the projection, but you're not going to get those undercuts. So that's the big difference between the extractor and then trying to extract a VDM. So most of the times you're not going to want to extract a VDM, especially if you want that VDM to keep those undercuts, because you're not going to get that captured in a simple alpha. So that's one of the reasons why we added the VDM brush, because it gave you that flexibility for the undercuts. Does that make sense, Jex? For the seamless options for the pickup, your best bets are going to be coming in and doing the width and changing these sliders here. So if you're in from brush mode, which is going to allow you to grab the details from your surface and add them to your brush, you can modify these values here, and this will attempt to make it seamless. But if you really want it to be perfectly seamless, you're going to have to do like some crazy grab calculations to get it through. So it's never gonna, it's gonna get as close as it can using these options here. But as for 100% seamless, you're gonna have to make that texture to be seamless. And then one thing you can use to do that is there's a plugin you can download too called Nanotile Textures. That's on the download center. And then you can grab that, and this will allow you to use nano meshes to go through and make kind of tiling seamless things. And then you can pick those up, and then you can use that with your texture and an alpha. And now with the new A option here, and apply those to your mesh, and then those will tile correctly. Yeah, so there's a baby Yoda I started. I didn't have any, I put him in here as in terms of demo purposes, but I didn't know it was gonna. He's still in work in progress here. I started him the other day because everyone else was doing them. So he's all Sculptris Pro. He's still got some items I need to work out. Lots of Sculptris Pro. And so as I'm doing the Sculptris Pro stuff, one thing that I like, so I have a few settings I always change. First one is in the stroke for Sculptris Pro. I turn the combined off, so I just turn that off, and then I up my undivide ratio. So I went into details on this in the last stream before 2020 was out, and this allows me to, add tessellation, but then if I smooth, it's going to remove it. So then I go through and remove. My smooth is only going to remove; it's not going to add, and then my sculpting strokes are only going to add; they're never going to remove. So by disabling the combined option here, it's going to give me that kind of solution for it. Another thing with using Sculptris Pro, after a while, so on this machine here, usually around 500,000 or so, sometimes 750, my brush strokes will start to get a little bit sluggish because the mesh is so dense. And so as you're working on this, if you find that your stuff is a little slow or sluggish, what I end up doing is I'll take my model and then I'll go to the Z plugin tab and I'll go to the where are you at? Decimation master, and I'll just decimate them down to 75K. So my normal Sculptris Pro workflow is sculpt, 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 sculpt. When it starts getting sluggish because my polygon count is getting too high for my machine, I'll then come over here, decimate this down to 75K. This usually takes a second. This brings me way down underneath that level now, and as you can see, there's hardly any change in any of the sculptural detail. So this is what it was before at 252, and this is what it is at 75. So there's no change there sculpturally. So you'll see the topology changed. So if I undo this, you can see I had a lot more topology through here, and then now it's reduced, so I got it back. But as for the sculptural details, just running that decimation is going to bring it back down. I still get all the sculptural stuff I have, and then now I can come back in and continue to sculpt, and then keep doing this process. And then when I reach that plateau of my machine again, decimate it down, go back to sculpting, reach the plateau, decimate it down, and it's just that back and forth. And this allows me to get, you know, pretty much what I want out of the models. One thing I do like a lot about Sculptris Pro is that if you don't like anything, you can instantly change it, instantly remove it, and you're not relying on that underlying topology. So if you have a head that has, you know, this nice edge flow for animation for the eyes and stuff, sometimes I find that when I'm working or sculpting on something, if I find that, hey, these wrinkles look awful, I need to change them, if there's already that set line in there, it's sometimes hard to break it, right? So it's sometimes hard to get, you know, a refined form. Now one area, usually around the eyes, is this like kind of area through here, where if I wanted to come in and I had topology set up, let's see, I'm just gonna get it to kind of generate this, and I wanted to say come through and do this, you can see how I'm getting this kind of gobbledygook, right? And so I could try to divide this up a bunch of times, right? And it would give me more fidelity, but my topology isn't matching that stroke that I'm trying to make. And this is never going to end up giving me what I want. So one thing with Sculptris Pro is that since it's tessellating and decimating on the fly, it doesn't care. So I can come through and now generate that stroke, and you can see how much different that is, right? So now I'm actually getting that mark that I wanted, and now I can fully come through and flesh that out, and I'm not fighting that underlying topology. So this is one of the, you know, huge things since we've added Sculptris Pro. If I'm doing any kind of organic sculpting, it's 100% Sculptris Pro. I just keep it on, because if I don't like anything, I can come through and cut it out, smooth it out, and then add something, you know, totally new right on top of it, and it's going to allow me to get that fold. If I want that some sort of deep cut, you know, through here, I'm not fighting topology to get that, right? So it's going to give me exactly what I want. If I want to make an abrupt change and do something like that, I'm able to do it. Versus if I didn't have Sculptris Pro on, you know, I could get it on some areas depending on what the topology is, but there's a lot of cases where, you know, I'm just not going to have that right edge flow to fit that sculptural mark. So fun thing there with little baby Yoda. Little baby Yoda. But he still needs some work. I started blocking out some clothes. I was trying to keep him rough, and then I can't do it, and then I get into the detail stuff, and then he may be gone. He may never be finished. Oh, all right, look at these questions here. I don't have an answer for you on Linux. Don't know. No answer there. Yeah, so the retopology of this stuff is, you know, for most of the things now, depending on what it is, I'll often do, we had a question about retopologizing the character. So yeah, it depends. Nowadays, ZRemesher has become more of the kind of norm process that I'll use on stuff. So just an example, let me just duplicate him here. I'll come down and just ZRemesh with the default settings, and it's going to go through and process this. And so you'll see what it gets here in a second. Wait for it. Wait for it. ZZoo, so to turn off symmetry, you can hit X on your keyboard. It's also going to live in the transform palette here, and there's an activate symmetry option. And this, if you hover over it, you'll see the hotkey is X. So if you hit X, it's going to turn it on and off. And then with ZRemesher, if you have symmetry on, it's going to actually process faster because it doesn't have to do both sides. It's going to do half of the model and then weld it back together. So if you have symmetry on when you're doing ZRemeshing, it's going to speed up your ZRemesh. And so that's the topology I'm getting with just the default ZRemesh, and then I can test it, you know, basically with dynamic subdivision. Just turn that on there. So that's the ZRemeshed version of his work in progress head there. So at that point, you know, if I want it lower, I can come in here, I can ZRemesh again, and I'll turn half on and then run this again, and it's going to process. But it actually does, you know, a really good job in terms of retopology on a lot of things. Now, if you needed specific, say, edge loops for animation and things like that, you can come in and add polygroups, which is going to give you control. ZRemesher will look at those groups, look at the borders, look at the creases, and use those as guides. But if you're not animating it, basically you can just run it through the default process, and it's going to give you a result. And then this is often helpful for just even kind of softening things up. So if I do, say, something like his, you know, his jacket, which is a horrible mess right now. Basically, if I wanted a kind of a cheap way to kind of clean it up really quick and give me, you know, something kind of easier, I'd basically rough something in with some really rough sculpting, and then I'd ZRemesh the model, which would then go through, soften it up, because it's basically give me a new calculation. And then if I divide it up, it's going to soften that form. So for wrinkle sculpting and stuff like that, you can take something and really kind of carve real rough into it. So let's go and do this here. So if I come in and just, you know, do something like this quick. So that's pretty rough, but if I ZRemesh it, wait for it, wait for it. And now divide, you see it's going to soften it. So that's another way you can kind of, you know, use your topology to your advantage, sculpt something really rough, and then soften it up. Correspondingly, you can also use the clay polish as well. There's the clay polish one too, and this will apply some softening too. I usually end up going more the ZRemesher route because sometimes I don't want like all those details. Like I, you know, kind of preferred that really soft ZRemesher version. So you can take some stuff, sculpt it really quick, ZRemesh it, get your result, and then you can determine, hey, that looks good, that doesn't look good, and go from there. Let's see what else I got in here. Let's look at these questions. Yeah, so we have a question about painting and UVing and the ZRemesher stuff. So yeah, ZRemesher is it basically for UVing. Basically, you just don't want to you know, unwrap something or UV something that's like millions and millions of polygons. It's just not going to happen. So ZRemesher would give you the ability to get that model to a lower resolution. Then you could UV that at that level. There's also, if you don't want to spend a lot of times in UV stuff, here, there's some kind of ways you can work around that too. So one thing with, say, this one, let's ZRemesh him again one more time here. It just depends on kind of what your end goal is. So if your end goal is animation, you're definitely going to want to do, you know, a better ZRemesh that's focused on edge loops and stuff and flow control for the animators to animate. So you're going to want to make sure you have those edge loops set so the stuff deforms correctly if the model's deforming. If your goal is for, say, a prop or something inside, you know, an environment, right, that's going to be 100% static, you could use ZRemesher to do it and then project the details back to it. But you could also do something like just decimate it down. So if you come through here and say decimate this to 20K, it's going to try to hold those sculptural details and it's going to decimate it down. Now this is going to give you a lot of triangles and a lot of weird geometry. So you can see I'm getting stuff like this. However, if it's a static, it's usually going to be pretty fine. So it's not, focus isn't on animating. This works really well for rocks and things like that because you can just sculpt the heck out of something. Decimate it down, it's going to keep your sculptural stuff. And then now you can just apply some UVs. Now if your UVs don't need to be perfect, you just want them to say apply some other materials to it or something like that. There's a few ways you can do this as well. So the first way is you can go to say UV master and just don't even set anything, just unwrap it. And this is going to apply and unwrap. This one's actually going to give you a pretty decent one where you could actually open it up as a flattened version of it and paint on it if needed. You could also use the new often now in the morph UV, which is if you go to the UV map area here, there's this morph option which will allow you to get flat and then you can paint flat inside of ZBrush. The other option is that in the UV map there's also these create options here, and some of these will just give you just UVs, basically like per face, per whatever, and they're going to give you enough UV sets. They're going to make seams all over the place. So if you're just doing a render and you just want to use texturing or something else, like it's going to be fine on that. But if you're going to put it in an engine, it's going to make the model extremely expensive. But you have these PUV tiles and AUV tiles down here, and this will go through and it's just going to look at the faces of the mesh and just give basically a UV for pretty much every face, try to group some things here or there. So these are good, like kind of fast throwaway UV textures that you can use just to go through the process of UVs. So I'll use these sometimes too, just to, I want to store this color on the meshes UVs, but I don't want to go through and unwrap the entire model and make it perfect. So quick and dirty UVs here too. So you can use UV master, or you can come through here. And this will work, these work pretty well on models that have a lot of high polygon counts too. If you get overlapping, so sometimes if you run these, it'll tell you that, hey, stuff's overlapping. You can change this UV map border slider right here and then run them again, and then it'll allow you to get process that mesh. So a thing there. Let's check at these questions quick. So this, I'm on a notebook right now. So I'm on a 2011 laptop. High power, high power. So that's why my ZRemesh took a little bit here. Yeah, 32 cores would be nice. I'd love 32 cores. Yeah, you could top of the model at any time. The retopology is basically what you would do if you needed to say be animated. And you can take it to every level you want out of that and then project the details back from your animated version to the other one. It just depends what your end goal is on your mesh. Oftentimes, I mean, that's really the big thing. Are you going to have it run around and be animated? Then you're going to want nicer topology on your real-time resolution versus your high-res. But if you're just doing something static, or you're just, you know, it just depends on what your goal is. Let's see here. This question about my favorite technique that's called fallen to the wayside. I don't know. I don't know if I have a. I still use a lot of stuff, even the older stuff I kind of go back to. So I think the one that I miss, this is the one I used to use a ton. Can I show you this one? Let's say, let's see if it's been a while. Let's see what I can get it to work here. So let's take my work in progress Yoda here. And let's say I want to do multiple renders, right? So up here in the, this is the old ZBrush party trick, right? So in marker here, there's these things called markers. And these work only on canvas. I haven't used these in ages, so if this goes awry, I'm blaming UPro4210 if this goes bad. All right, so markers will allow you to store a marker data on the canvas. And so your canvas is basically the area you can sculpt on in your model. If you guys start ZBrush 2 and your canvas isn't going all the way to the edge, you can fix this by going to Document, turn on this W size option here, and then click New Document, and this is going to give you a new document and fit into your screen. So there's no reason why you need to be, you know, sculpting. Let's change this a little darker color here. I'll just do something like that. Sculpting in this size window if your ZBrush interface is all the way around, right? So if you guys are doing this and you're sculpting just in this little bit of real estate here on your 4K monitor, come up here, go to Document, make sure W size is on, click this New Document button here, click No. That's now going to fill this space. You can now come up here and do Save as Startup Document. That's going to remember that when you next go into ZBrush. And now I take your tool, draw it back out, go into Edit Mode, and now look at that. Now you can sculpt all the way around. Okay? So, one little thing there, which is related to the canvas, that every once in a while I'll see people that are in ZBrush and they just sculpt on this little tiny thing in here. You can make that bigger and then have a little more functionality with it. So, markers. So markers are going to store position data in a little dot that's going to live on your canvas. So I can come over here and set a marker there, and then let's rotate Yoda to the side. Let's move him here. Marker, add another one. Move him here, rotate him like that. Marker, add another one. So now what I've done is I've added 3 markers. Now you can't see this when you're in edit mode, so if I get out of edit mode, and now I clear my canvas, and let's see if you guys can see these. So on the canvas here, if I hover over that spot, you see this little blip? That's a marker. There's another marker, and there's another marker. Okay, so I have 3 markers there, right? So what I used to use this for is, let's say I wanted to render out things specifically inside of ZBrush, front, back, and side, and I wanted them all to be aligned. So if I had multiple characters that were, you know, pretty much the same proportions, and I wanted to render them out multiples, instead of me trying to figure out where they fall in the space, you could use markers to do this. So if you come across a marker and click, it's going to apply the mesh back in that exact same position. So I've just applied Yoda there, right? So now I come over here, apply him there, and apply them there. And now it's gone through and applied them in that exact same space. So if I clear my canvas again, and we do it again, you can see, just coming on and clicking these, it's going to put them right back in that same spot. And this is going to store that positional data for anything. So if I come over and say select, say let's just do his head this time. All right, so let's do the Polymesh 3D star. So take next tool I have, come across the canvas here. Oh, that one's going to be a little bit small, I think. Yoda's a little bit bigger. Oh, there he is. Click, click, click. So now it's taken the star and remembered the position data on that. So markers will allow you to kind of position things on it, but it's really, the basis of it is that you can use it for 2.5D. Now one fun thing with markers is we're going to delete all these. This is the other one that is interesting, that I find amusing. And this one I haven't used in a while either, but it's definitely, I haven't found a useful thing in this, but it's one of those things like, oh, that's cool. So here I have a ring, and I'm going to edit mode. And I'm going to position it here. I'm going to marker, store it. I'm going to move it. Actually, let's undo this one more time. Let's delete all. So marker, store it. Shift S to snapshot. Rotate. Marker, store, Shift S, rotate, marker, store, Shift S, rotate, marker, store, Shift S, rotate, marker, store. And we'll do one more. Rotate. So now I've created markers for these rings, right? So I took one ring and stored a marker for each position. So now if I clear my canvas, they're gone. We get out of edit mode. You see now I have all these little markers for each one of these rings. So I could come across, click, and it's going to give me my rings back where the position are. However, now in 2.5D mode, if I come over here, and in here there is a multi-markers option here. And what multi-markers is going to do, so this is, you went down a tangent. You didn't know you were going back in space here, back in time. So what it's going to do now is, as I draw this out, it's going to grab all those marker data. And so as I draw this out, it's grabbing all those markers, and it's now giving me one file that contains the data from each of those markers. So now I have a subtool that is all those chains together, right? So let's do that again. So I drew all those markers out with all those rings, and now if I draw it out, you can see I'm getting this. And now in the modifiers here, I can now take that marker data that it's stored and I can turn it to a poly mesh. And now I have a set of rings here. That was done with markers. So now obviously that's one of the things that it was an old technique that I haven't used at all, but it's one of those recently because there's easier ways to do this now, right? If I want to make a chain, I can just duplicate and rotate with the Gizmo 3D. But it's a little fun thing there with markers. So that's all. If you want to blame that demo, just blame it on Pro 4210. That's what you got. That's what you got. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, the marker menu's always been there. It's been there forever. Yeah, I've been using it basically for rendering purposes. All right, so I got kind of one more thing I want to kind of cover here that's kind of fun. That I want to show you guys. That may be some interesting, and also kind of go into the. I do like some shadow box too. There's a little love for shadow box in there. I use a lot of shadow box. It's great for fleshing out different designs. Well, here we'll go on a tangent with shadow box because. We're getting a little, no one's giving me love. No one's giving love for Shadowbox. So I'll show you the way I use Shadowbox. Let's do that quick, okay? So Shadowbox is let's just load a new project here. So this is the, pretty much my go-to kind of if I start building something. I always go to like this primitives file. It's either that or this Sphere 3D project. These are one of the two. The primitive ones, they're all kind of set up with dynamic subdivisions and stuff. So if you turn dynamic on, they've got edge creasing, they've got inner locations, they got poly groups, they got like different shapes you can kind of manipulate and move. So just a little random tidbit of knowledge there. So Shadowbox. So Shadowbox is going to allow you to create geometry from masking. So basically using a mask creates a shadow, shadows give you geometry, right? So what I do with this is I'll use it to block out shapes. And so I'll come through here, and Shadowbox lives in the geometry palette. There's Shadowbox here. You have a resolution slider over here, very similar to Dynamesh. So if you have a model at a certain size, Dynamesh is going to give you a polygon count. It's also going to give you more details the higher the slider is. So I'm going to set this to say, we'll do 512 for this. And then I'm going to activate Shadowbox. Now Shadowbox is going to turn on, and this is what you're going to get off the start. So if you had a model and you had it selected and you entered in Shadowbox, it's going to take that model, generate a mask based on the object you have, and now you're going to get something like this. So you got a box. You can see the shadows have been generated on 3 sides of this box, and then it's now giving you geometry. So that star looks great, but that's not what I want, right? So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to clear my mask out. And now, a lot of times with Shadowbox, what I'll do is I'll just work on one plane. So if I hold Control and mask here, and then release, if it's on this back edge here, so you can use a little face here to figure out where back is, it's going to give you this nice shape based off your masking, and it's going to give you at this certain thickness, right? So this is the thickness you're going to get off this masking plane. So as I come over here and add more, you see it's giving me geometry based on the masking. So I can clear that out, do all sorts of stuff, get a mask, yada, yada, yada. Now these second planes are going to add more information to it. So if I come through and say do this, and now I want it to be a little wider, I can come over on this plane, and wherever I have a stroke over here, it'll now widen that mask. And so it's taking this, it's using this and this, and now you can see this is the result I'm getting. So if I wanted to go all the way down this shape, I probably want to come over here and do something like this. and so now I have this, right? So the back plane here, if you just apply masking to that, you're gonna get this really quick shape, and it's always gonna have a certain thickness. If you wanna add more thickness to that, you can then start masking on these other two planes. So for my basic workflows that I use with Shadowbox, I pretty much just always do it on one plane and be done. And so for this, what I do is I'll use these, instead of thinking as this as my entire scene, right? I'll think of this single shadow box here as part of my scene, right? So let's say I'm doing we'll do some sort of like quick robot sketch here. Now, one thing when using this, you can see as I have geometry starting being created, I can't see the mask underneath. So if you come over here and activate transparency and turn off ghost, now you're just gonna be able to see the mask and just know that your geometry is gonna get created. Now, when I do masking stuff too, if I try to apply it in a positive fashion, you see I'm gonna get nice round edges, but I don't want round edges, I want kind of harsh things. So I'll add roundness first, and then I'll hold Alt, and then use the opposite to give me harsh, right? So I'll use positive for smooth, Alt for harsh, and this is gonna allow me to get different shapes. And then if I don't like any of this, I can clear it out. But so as an example, let's say I come in and I start using this to kind of sketch out some sort of shape, and then maybe do something like this. Come through and just, as I can see, as I come through and I'm just making this form here. Now if I turn off transparency, this is what I got, right? So let's say some sort of robot character, right? So got a base head, got a base body, get out of shadow box, now I have my geometry. So now I want to add some more to this. So instead of using that same shadow box, what I'm going to do is go to the subtool palette. I'm going to duplicate this. It's going to be another version of here. And this one, I want it to be a shadow box, but I want it a little bit larger because I want to make an arm, right? So I'm going to come and just scale this up a little bit, move it down to say here, and then now go to shadow box. 512 again. Get that version created, clear it out. So now I have another shadow box in my scene. So now I go to draw, turn on transparency again, and now I can have another shadow box that I'm adding to my existing scene. So I'm using this as a shape builder. So now I can come through and say, let's give him, I don't know what this guy's turning into, but let's say I give him some sort of crazy robot arm through here. And you can also use the spotlight stuff to do this as well. So it just varies what kind you want. And then after you have this created, you can ZRemesh it, retopologize it, clean it up, cut it up, do whatever you need. So let's say I got something like that, and he's gonna have some random fingers here. So you can see this is kind of how I'll end up building. So just looking at the silhouette of an object, figuring out what the heck I want out of it. I can easily come in, clip remove stuff. If I don't like it, I can add it back in. And just working on the forms. So this is how I use Shadowbox. And then after I'm happy with that part, come back out. See, now I've got an arm over there. I can now start widening these. So if I look at the topology on these, you can see they give me nice polygroups front and back, right? And I can now polish these if I want. So you can see I've got some ripples through here. Now I could have increased this polish slider over here for the shadow box, which would apply that polish after that shape gets created. I could also increase the res, which would give me a little more fidelity. But basically, if it's low enough like this, you can use other processes too. So I can come through and now go to say deformation and use any of the polish over here. So polish by groups is a good one, and polish that out. You can see now this is getting nice and soft. If you want to bevel this now too, you can go to the crease option, and there's a little hidden bevel that was introduced, I think, in it was 2019. So if you hold Control down and use this bevel width, it's going to look at the polygroup breakup on your model, and it's going to apply a bevel around the edge. So I can hold Control and click this, and now I got some of that nice beveling. So there you go, you can do something like that. And then, as we talked about earlier, mirror and weld it. Oh, never in the right direction. There we go. Activate symmetry. You can move these Wait for it. So you can change your symmetry too. And then I select this body here, do the same process, we'll polish it by groups. Turn this white circle off, it's going to give you a stronger polish as it comes across the surface there. Do that same thing, let's give it a little bevel, bevel, bevel. Something like that. Lighten it up. And so you can see now I've started creating basic blockouts for something. And then at this stage I can go and use clip brushes, I can carve it out, do what I want to do, I can retopologize it, use ZRemesher, use ZModeler on top of the ZRemesh. So it's just endless, 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 endless. So all sorts of stuff. So there's your shadow box love. Little shadow box. There's no red wax love over here. You can get shadow box, but no red wax. So for the Snapshot 3D, which is kind of doing something similar to the shadow box stuff, so some of these inside spotlight. So let me grab one of these. Let's actually face the right way. Let's get a star here. So these are the Spotlight has Snapshot 3D, which was added in 2019, and this allows you to take shapes and you can bring these over. You can snap them to certain points on your mesh. So I can snap that to the center. You can scale this up and down, and then after you're happy with where the thing is, you can click this Snapshot 3D button. It's going to take this alpha, it's going to look at it, and it's going to transfer geometry. And when it transfers geometry, it's going to base the thickness on the subtool you have selected. So the Polymesh 3D star is what I have selected now. So if I click Snapshot 3D, you're now going to see that it's going to take it. It's going to use the thickness of that star, and now I have this part. Okay, so this one's pretty awesome too for generating quick geometry, because just using alpha shapes. I find that shadow box is a little bit easier to go in and paint with, but if you want to shape build from existing alphas or things like that, Spotlight's definitely the way to go for that with the Snapshot 3D. You just have a lot more control. With this as well, you'll see it's going to give me some nice polygripping. These are a little hard to see here. And you can use the bevel process on that and kind of clean up those lines as well. Now with the Snapshot 3D, there was a question asking how can I make the edges harsher. So the first thing is that if you have a large alpha, it's definitely going to go through and give you more fidelity. So the larger you generate the Snapshot 3D on, it's going to give you more fidelity. So you saw that was pretty good, but if I scale this really small and then move it here and generate a snapshot on that, zoom in here. I'm not a right-click army either. You guys get alt zoom. You can see the fidelity is different, right? So since that alpha was smaller when I created the snapshot, it's going to give me less fidelity than when I had that larger version. So one thing there in terms of keeping edges crisp, make sure that you're generating the alpha at a larger size, because basically it's going to use more information to generate the mesh out of it, and that's going to give you a cleaner result from that alpha. Next thing in the preferences, and let me make sure I can find it here. Where are we at? In Spotlight, there are some options here for the snapshot as well, and you can try changing these. So one, you have a snapshot smoothing, and so you can toggle this up or down to try to get those edges crisper. This is also, since it's looking at similar process that Spotlight was doing, right? You remember how you saw like I had those little kind of like edges that I had to polish out later? So similar thing here. So it is applying a smoothing process, taking that alpha and smoothing it to give you the result. So if you go down real low, you may end up getting some stair stepping. So change that there, just kind of figure out where it is. You also have a retain corners, which is going to look at the alpha and attempt to find things that are 45s and try to hold those so it won't smooth them out as much like that. And then you also have this border triangle option and another detect corners. So just changing those options there and processing it, you'll see the difference in what snapshot's going to give you from those models. But yeah, that process is really fun for creating things. Another thing with any of the stuff that's in here, as you're using these, if you want to scale them up to your maximum size of what they are, if you start scaling and hold down shift, it's going to scale it 100%. And then with this, you have this thing over here. So this is what Paul calls Christmas in the corner. So red, green, red, green, red, green. So Christmas in the corner over there. And these will allow you to modify these as well. So you can change these up and down, scale them up and down. So you can start modifying, manipulating your shapes pretty easy with these. And so you can do tiles and things like that. So it's a very unique way to come through and take alphas, even like these base shapes, and you can manipulate those alphas to generate a whole bunch of stuff. There's a video I've done on Z Classroom that's just using these primitive ones here, and I go through and create a whole like little girder scene with chains and everything, and all it is using, you know, these basic primitives. So you just take these basic primitives in Spotlight, you're modifying those, and then you're generating the assets from them. So a whole bunch of stuff you can do with that as well, and it's a lot of fun to play with. The geometry gets used pretty nice, so you can come through and bevel it off. You can then use ZRemesher, retopologize it, do whatever you want. It's a good way to base build. So another question on that. So we had a question asking about creating your own Spotlight stuff. So yes, 100%, you can create your own. So basically, if you have a bunch of alphas, just bring them in. I can even take these default ones, right? So let's say I want this in my snapshot scene. In the alpha palette, there's this little option here that's called Add to Spotlight. And you can click this, and this will take the alpha you currently have selected, and it's going to add it to the Spotlight scene there. So if you want to add to an existing one, I just came to Lightbox here, went to the Spotlight area, and I just loaded one of these in. And then now just select an alpha, click this little button here, it's going to take it and add it to your Spotlight set of alphas here. You can then come through and tile these so they kind of live over the side here and not all over the place. And then to save this out, it's going to go to Texture, and there's a Save Spotlight option here, and you can save that out. Now if you have a new Spotlight, you want to create one from scratch, you can do that as well. And so basically, I don't know if I have a blank one here. Basically what you do is you import in your alpha again, and if you have no alphas in Spotlight already, it's just going to make you a new Spotlight. And then you go through and select another alpha, import in, alpha, send to Spotlight, and you keep adding as many alphas as you want to Spotlight, and then just save it out. So you can definitely create your own stuff through Spotlight. And some of these that are in here, so these are some of the ones that we created, but then Ara, who's one of the streamers on Twitch too, these are his Spotlights that he used. So these are his with all his different parts here. And so he's got all these little different little shapes that you can come through and start using to create different elements in Spotlight. All right, so we got another Extractor brush question. So I'm gonna hit these, and then we'll see if I got time to go on my little holiday rant, because I want to show you guys this one thing. For the Extractor brush. So the Extractor brush, Andreas is asking that it's turning off after one stroke. So the pickup will turn off after one stroke, and that is correct. So the process for that brush is basically, if you have a surface, I'm just gonna add some marks here, is that it's going to look at the difference in your undos. So you guys have been here for the whole time, and I'm gonna hear me repeat myself. There's three options in which the surface is going to be extracted, right? So first option, if you have an undo, it's going to look at the first undo and compare it to the undo you're on. So right now, this mesh, if I try to extract these details, it's going to take from this undo, and use this as the first reference point, to this undo, and then it's now going to pick that up. So if I come over here and select the Extractor brush, and I hit G, when you hit G, this is going to go to extract mode. And so depending on which brush you have selected, when you're in extract mode, you can then come and pick up that detail. It's now going to create that alpha. And then after that detail is picked up and this is generated, you're going to get out of that mode. So when you hit G, it's activating this from brush mode right here. So hitting G, it's going to turn on, you pick up the mark, and then it's going to automatically turn it off. So it's only going to do it once. It's not going to keep it on for each stroke. So if I want to pick this up again, I'm going to have to G one more time and then extract again. and then that is now going to update over there. I'm out of G mode now, and when I'm out of the from brush mode, now I'll be able to use the extractor brush. Okay, so that's the thing there. It's the G option is only going to kick in once. It's grabbing, so think G is grabbing, and then it's going to return you to a brush and then allow you to use that part that's picked up. Now the extractor process, this from brush, can be used with any brush, so it's not only set up to be used with the extractor brushes, right? So it can be used with any brush inside of ZBrush. Now these extractor brushes right here, these are set up with some of the settings all ready to go. So if you want to just use it quick and do it, these are already set up. So there's some stroke options that are set on these to allow you to pick stuff up, and then after they're picked up, to allow it to be applied to kind of mimic that surface you picked up. So that is the reason why there's just some presets here, but you can use this on anything. If you want to use, you know, clay buildup brush, and as you're using it, you want to extract something out, hit G, it's going to enter extraction mode for clay buildup. You can then come across the surface, grab that detail there, and then it's now going to give you the alpha over there. Now the other options with the extractor, so that was option one, where it's basically going to look at the first undo compared to the undo you're currently on. The second option is that it's going to look at the point in which you set on the undo timeline. So if I have my sphere here, come up here, and now let's say I messed up that brush. Let's reset all my brushes quick. Yep, or G for Gabori. That's the other one. So many. That's why everything's got a G in it. I was just like, hey, this is gonna be mine. This is gonna be mine. So option two is that the extract is going to look at the control point you set to an undo. So right now there's no undos, so it's going to look at this one and compare it to this one. Let's say I don't want to pick up this and I just want to pick up this. So I can go back in my undo history to where those sculptural details were not located, hold control and click, and now this is going to be the point of reference for the extract. So now ZBrush is going to look at that undo and compare it to this undo, and when you extract, it's now going to look at those two differences, and I'm going to get the result. So if I come over here and try to extract these, it's not going to give me a result basically because I'm looking at this point compared to this point. So that's the second option. Third option is if your mesh has no undo history, right? So the first undo is the undo you're on. And at this stage, when you use the extractor, you don't really have, you're at the same undo. So you're comparing the same undo to the undo you're on. And at this stage, ZBrush is going to apply an algorithm and try to extract the details from your mesh automatically. Because you don't have a point of reference that's clearly defined, ZBrush is going to try to do the work for you. So this helps if you have scan data or things that may not have undos, you're still going to be able to pick up some information from that mesh. So if I come across these, use the G option, go across that, it's now going to pick those up. Now you will notice that this is going to give you a little different result from what I had if I had a mesh with no sculptural details compared to the one that had it. So for the previous one where I had two undo points that were clearly defined as no sculpting, sculpting. And then that gives ZBrush a very clear projection route between the one and the other and knows exactly what to grab. The algorithm is going to do a pretty good job grabbing it and giving you the result, but if you want it to be 100% kind of match from what you just sculpted, if you have something that's smoothed out and then you have one that's got the sculptural detail on it, that projection is going to work better. So those are the three there. So the unique palette of snapshot options here, let me restart and I'll show you this snapshot alpha creation thing quick. Life Lover. We'll do it one more time just to make sure you got it. Yes, so as long as we don't have any technical mishaps, this stream should be available for later. All right, so Life Lover here. I'm gonna walk through, you got him quick, the way to set up your own snapshot, or losing my words here, spotlight, so that you can set it up for Snapshot 3D. So this is just straight out of ZBrush. I have no snapshot, no spotlight loaded in. So let's say I have a series of alphas that I want to use. So I'm going to the alpha palette and let's select one of these guys. So I went to import, say right here, I've imported my alphas. They're all in the palette here. I'm gonna go to my first one. So let's say I really want the star, right? I want that as one of my build shapes to use with Snapshot 3D. Select it, and then down here I'm gonna click Add to Spotlight, and that's gonna add it in the Spotlight here. So you can see now I have one part in Spotlight. Now I come over to the alpha again, select a different alpha. So let's say I really want the French curve dinosaur here. And then I'm gonna go alpha, add to Spotlight. Now that's in Spotlight. So you can see now I have that, and I also have my star. And then just add one more, let's go alpha 19. Oh, if you have Spotlight open, it will replace it there. So we wanna go and grab this, and alpha, add that in there. So now I have those as my alphas. Now to get these tileable and kind of nice, you have some options here on the bar. You have tile selected, which will give you this. You have tile unified, and then you have tile proportional. So you can use these options here to kind of grab all those guys. If you have the spotlight wheel off in space and you scale, it's going to scale everything. If you have it over top of one, it's going to scale that one. So if you have it in space, then you scale, you can then make them smaller. You can then move them over here to the side of the screen. After you're happy with the positioning of this, you just need to go to the texture palette and do save spotlight, and that's going to save that spotlight out. Now if you save it into your ZBrush, I think it's, let's see where these are at, your ZBrush Z Spotlights folder there, then it will now be available for you in Lightbox here. So if you open Lightbox up, your spotlight would appear here, and then to load it in, you can just double click, now load it in, and then you go in and start manipulating it. So there you go. So that's the from nothing to something. All right, so I got one more, and then this will be the end. So I'm gonna show you something kind of cool. So let's see here. So I was messing with a little while ago, and I made a little scene here. It's a little ZBrush holiday here. Since it's that time of the year, I wanted to show you guys how I did these little trees, because I thought it was pretty clever. And I want to show you guys how I did it. So the rope here on the car was done with Z-spheres, and then Marcus on ZBrush Central made this little plugin that basically will allow you to capture the Z-spheres, and it will generate a curve out of those Z-spheres, and then I just took an IMM brush and applied it to that curve, and that gave me the rope instantly. Car was all Z-modeled, so I went through and did all that. The pen was actually a scan data asset that Wacom allowed us to use, and then the other things are just Z-modeler data and then simple IMM curves and stuff. So the tree, however, I want to show you guys what this kind of is and kind of how I did this, because it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool. You guys might just be like, whatever. All right, so let's go back to ZBrush. So here I have my my final tree here, and you guys can probably see what it's made up of. It's really, you know, very simplistic. These are those little trees you can kind of get at hobby stores or whatever, and they're usually just a bunch of wire, and then they have like all these kind of like little metal things coming out of it, and then they just look like this, and they've got this wooden base that this thing's tacked into. Okay. So to make this, I used a few things. There's basically like 4 things that are being used with this. So the first one is an IMM brush, which is what's going to generate the pipe through here. Then Z-modeler, which made the little base here. Then fiber mesh, which gave me the tree kind of area. And then I used live booleans. Okay. So let's go and show you this part here. So here's my little rope here. So I did a little ZBrush on how to make a braid, basic same thing. So this was an IMM part, however it's drawn out straight. So to draw it out straight, what I did was I basically came through and took a, say, plain 3D object, loaded my little brush I made, and then just come through on the surface of your mesh here. It's a Polymesh 3D. don't go to the edge. And you see it's going to snap to the vertices of that, and then as I release, I'm now getting this nice and straight line here. So I just took an IMM brush, I brought it in on a plane 3D. As I drew it out, I held shift, which allowed it to snap along the vertices of the plane there. And then as long as you don't go to the edge, if you go to the edge, it's going to try to frame the entire border. So make sure when you do this, you're just in the center of the plane. And then after that's done, I can now go to the geometry tab here and go to the subtool area here. Go to split, and I can split unmasked points. So it's going to take the unmasked part, which is what I just drew out, and it's now going to split it off in its own tool. And now I am left with this nice little wire. Now at this stage you can divide it up if you want, you can activate dynamic subdivisions, and you're going to get something like this. So pretty easy there. IMM brush, drawn straight, right? So after I had that, what I did is I masked out part of this. So I masked it out, and then I just came to the fiber mesh area and just turned it on, and I get this craziness, right? So I got fibers all over the place. So you can see I'm getting that shape there. And then for the base of my little thing here, this is just another Z-modeler part. So you can see it's just Z-modeled cylinder, added little bevels on the edges, divided it up, and then converted the dynamic subdivisions to traditional subdivisions. I wasn't too concerned about the topology, so you can see I got this nice, beautiful star pattern in the center here. And then as it goes with the post, which then has the fibers on it, this is what I got at this stage. Now at this stage, this is not really what I wanted the tree to look like, right? So basically I could have came in and started grooming this, right? It was going to take me a while to kind of comb it all down. I could have done something where I applied the mask to this in a gradial kind of stroke, so taken the metal post here and made it darker here, and then as the gradient goes up for the masking, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter, which would then allow me in the fiber mesh area to have the length profile be controlled by that mask a little bit, and so it would give me a little bit less as it would taper up. But I wanted to kind of dense all the way through, and that really wasn't giving me the perfect solution for what I wanted. So what I ended up doing for the fiber mesh is I took it and converted it to geometry. So I just went to the geometry, where's my metal here, and applied accepted the fiber mesh, and then this gave me this. This is the fiber mesh version of this. And then I went through and I created a cone. And so here is my cone, and this was just a standard cone primitive. So I came up here, grabbed the cone object here, basically took this, stretched it out, did a little shenanigans on it, and then I divided this up to make it smooth. And then let me turn on the polymesh first. And then you'll notice that this, if I take this and say trim that fiber mesh with this, I'm gonna get a nice straight tree. And that worked okay too, right? But I wanted that little variation. So I wanted that kind of undulation where some of those things may not be clipped exact, which is giving that better illusion of this being a fake tree. So I went to the surface noise area and I applied some noise to this, just the generic noise, and I upped the scale and upped the strength, and then applied this, and this ended up spiking the model. So the more you do this, the more spiking it's going to get. So simple cone object, added noise, and this is what I got out of that, right? So I get this kind of tree shape already, but it's not that nice, you know, wires. So what I did then was I took the wires and I activated live boolean, and then I subtracted the noise cone from it. And then this gave me this result. So I've used now that fiber mesh, which is turned into a mesh, so I have geometry for that. I then created a cone, set that cone as a intersection boolean here, and that had noise on it. And so now this is the result I'm getting. So it's looking at those two objects overlapping, and now I'm getting this nice tree effect for the fake tree here. So a little thing there that was kind of cool because you're using like multiple techniques. It's a simple shape. If you guys want to work through it, it's a good kind of thing to kind of, if you're new to ZBrush and want to try out some different things, definitely a fun way to do. It's also holiday season, so ZModeler base, IMM brush for the post, fiber mesh for the leaves, little cone addition here, little surface noise, little live booleans, bing bada boom, and now I've got my little tree. And then I convert these to geometry. If I go into my scene here, you can see this is what I ended up with in terms of my scene. And then I just sent this off to get rendered and applied some different labels and stuff for that final image, and you ended up with that. So little trees there, little car, little rope, little ZBrush. All right, let's see if there's anything in the chat here. See Mike Morgan's in here. I totally blanked on your name the other day talking about the gloves. I apologize for that. Mike Morgan makes the ZBrush sculpting gloves. Let's go hit him up. I tipped on creased edges with Snapshot. I think that's it. You guys have any more questions? It's kind of, chat's kind of went silent. You guys still awake? All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in. I hope some of this information has been helpful. Once again, the ZBrush 2020 release is available. So if you guys have a license to ZBrush already, definitely go ahead and upgrade. It's a free upgrade. There's a bunch of new items in here as well. And so this is just the page at pixelage.com for the 2020 features. You go through, there's going to have some different information on this. There's also some demos from some of the other streamers. So Michael Pavlovich has a great demo showing some of his stuff. Pablo has a bunch of stuff too. So some of these artists are from, models are from him too, covering all these different features that were added. And once again, everything inside ZBrush kind of goes together. So don't feel like you have to use like just the new features. You know, I use old features. Probably not that the one I showed with the markers as much as I used to. But definitely they all kind of coexist together and build off one another. So there's no right way, there's no real wrong way to do anything. So just do what works for you, and that's the best kind of solution there is. So thank you guys. The ZZoo is open, located, let me hit on that real quick because there was a question on that and I totally didn't get to it. So the ZZoo lives in the Lightbox. So if you hit Lightbox here or press COM on your keyboard, they'll open that up. And if you go to the project panel, and then in here there's a folder called ZZoo. And then in here is all the different Z-sphere animals you can use as base meshes for starting sculpting. So you can just come through if you want to load in one of these. Say I want to do a gorilla. Just load that guy in. I'm just going to load that project right up. Now he's in like this. If I want to manipulate this, I can switch to move, scale, or rotate and start moving these around. Start changing my gorilla portions. So do all sorts of stuff with that. Add, remove. Anything you have with the Z-spheres. After you like that, you can go to the adaptive skin here. You can press A on your keyboard and it'll show you a preview of it. There's also ability that the adaptive skin will kick in with Dynamesh too. So if you want a Dynamesh model, you can come over and change this, and this will actually go through and Dynamesh the mesh, and then you can start sculpting on it as well. So the ZZoo lives in Lightbox in the project folder, and then there is the ZZoo folder there, and then all these Z-sphere animals are located there. So I think that is everything. Well, thank you all for showing up. And yeah, I would like to stream more regularly. My internet connection at my house is pretty much hot garbage. So I'm actually in a space that's not my studio right now, leeching some internet. It's a lot faster here. So thank you all, and I think that's it. Have a good day. Take care. Happy ZBrushing.